I'd like to introduce Ken Pfeil. I would definitely consider Ken a cybersecurity expert. So he's currently the chief architect for TechDemocracy, and he served in a variety of roles such as chief security officer, chief information security officer. So he has decades of experience and really has seen the landscape change significant in regards to cybersecurity. So he's going to help us understand some aspects of it: hacking, share some best practices for us in supply chain, and then show us some predictions for the future. So welcome, Ken. Glad you're here with us today, and we'll turn it over to you.
So thanks everyone for having me here. I'd much rather, as everyone else, be doing things in person, but circumstances being what they are, we'll do the best we can. So what I wanted to cover today is strictly on cybersecurity, and the main topic that I would love to have a common theme throughout of this is keeping in the back of your mind hacking motivations. Why do people do these things? And so what I'd like to do is kind of take you through a quick timeline. I'm not going to explain and get into every single incident and since 1903 when the first reported hack, but I will cover up some of the more practical ones and the more relatable ones, just so that we can understand the motivations behind them. Then I'd like to get into just a few of best practices for supply chain risk management, at least from the information security side. You're going to run into dozens and dozens of standards as we do in information security, and it kind of comes down to a lot of it is actually common sense. So we've got to figure those out. Then I'd kind of like to get inside the head for about 5 minutes of a typical CISO and how he should be doing his reporting if he's not already. Everything from the minutia level up to the executive level, and how do we make good sense of that? Just kind of a look under the propeller cap, if you will, and maybe you can understand him a little bit better and see what makes him tick. Then I'm going to go into my 5 predictions for the future of cybersecurity, as to things that I think are going to take place within the next 18 months to 2 years or so. So flipping right into it, the first known reported hack was Neville Mesklin. Neville Mesklin was he was a magician, but he also dabbled in the side as an electrician, and he was really upset that Marconi had a broad range of patents, and as such, he couldn't bring his stuff to market and that sort of thing. And so Marconi had been broadcasting that he had a secure telegraph or secure wireless telegraph that he was going to demonstrate, and that nobody could break into it. We all hear that stuff today. How it's all unhackable. But anyone that's tuned into a particular radio station on their car and just flipped the dial to a particular frequency, that's exactly what he was doing. And so Neville Mesklin actually hacked into his demo. And it started out innocent enough, and he was typing out in Morse code, rat, rat, rat. And then that progressed into a little thing that said, there once was a man from Italy who manipulated, people quite prettily and that sort of thing. So the motivation on that was a personal attack. Progressing up to 40 years later during World War II, Rene Carmil, he was at the time, and there are several books about this. IBM was actually doing the census information for the Nazis. And the Nazis were using that information to locate Jewish folks and round them up and put them in death camps, as we all know, with them. When they got to France, Rene Carmil, he had convinced them to let them handle the census. And so after much ado, his primary intent was to locate people and people that had French military backgrounds, and he located them and kind of helped form the resistance and that sort of thing. And some years later, they had asked his son, who worked on the project, Robert, with him. They had asked him, basically what they did. How did they avoid reporting? And he said, well, We just didn't check option 11. That's all. Option 11 was the religious preference on that little card. Fast forward up 1971, that's when phone phreaking was really popular. I wasn't quite into computer systems and hacking and things of that nature, but phone phreaking at that time was a way to make free phone calls. And the way that you used to make free phone calls was you'd pick up the receiver, you would get that dial tone, and then you would whistle a 2600 hertz tone into it. That would put you into the main trunk where you can actually make your calls for free. And a little bit later on, that's where 2600 magazine got their name from, was that frequency, the 2600 hertz. Going down to I'll go down to Captain Midnight, for example. John McDougal was actually he was a satellite tech for a place in I believe it was Ocala, Florida. And he was upset with HBO raising their prices up to, I believe it was like $12.95 a month or $13.95 a month or something like that. He was unhappy because he sold satellite systems on the side. And so it was hurting his side business. And so what he did was, one night after Pee Wee Herman's Playhouse was over, he redirected the satellites. He hijacked HBO's signal, and for 4.5 minutes, he ran a please stand by screen with a message to HBO. So a lot of these things you can actually even still find on YouTube. Down to Max Headroom. If you remember him from the folks that were around during the 80s, during the new Coke wave, Max Headroom was a computer-generated figure. I think he was like the first computer-generated TV host or whatever. These people were never caught. They actually hijacked a local TV station in Chicago, their airwaves, and then they also had hijacked PBS as well, and they ran their message. They were never located, never found. Down to DEF CON. DEF CON is probably in their 23rd season or so. DEF CON is the world's largest hacking convention, and that's in Las Vegas, Nevada every year. And the folks that live in Vegas, they'll tell you that whenever DEF CON comes to town, don't use the ATMs located around the hotels. Try to stay basically off the grid, because when you've got thousands and thousands of hackers just looking to play around and kind of experiment, it can get quite sneaky. I spoke at DEF CON in 2005. And one of the questions that I had gotten from the audience was, at the time, was, would you hire hackers? And quite simply, I think there's still a video out of me even telling them that I don't hire hackers per se. I hire smart people, and what they do with their own personal time, as long as it does not hurt us, you really can't control it. All you can do from the people perspective is just to encourage them and try and make them happy in the workplace, to where they don't feel like they have to go out and hack everyone. Going down to, I'll say, the I Love You bug. That was in 2001. And I was working at Microsoft at the time, and when the I Love You virus came out, we even had a hard time with it. There were no virus definitions. There was very little from the InfoSec perspective that was even fully organized at that particular point. So even we had a hard time with it. America's Most Wanted hacker, Kevin Mitnick. Kevin was sentenced to 5 years of a prison federal term. And I've known Kevin since that time as well, ever since he got out. He wasn't even allowed to touch a computer for 5 years. For, I think, 3 or 4 years of that 5-year sentence, because they gave him time served, 3 to 4 years of that sentence, he was in solitary confinement because the judge was afraid that he could just pick up the phone and whistle launch codes for ICBMs. Kevin's got his own company now, and he's doing quite well from a social engineering perspective. Social engineering is it's a form of people hacking, is what it is. It's getting people to do things, basically for you. One of the things that I used to do from the penetration testing, which was, testing of companies' networks, and they would hire me to do that thing. I would include some aspects of social engineering in there. And I remember one of my tests, I actually walked right into the data center. They let me right into the data center. Many years ago, I worked for Dell Computer Corporation, and Dell never got their badge back from me. So I used this little thing. You can see the 80s mustache and everything in there as well. I used this little thing to say, look, your CEO is complaining he's not getting his email. We think the email server's down. So, I've got a network card that I'm going to try for it. They walked me literally right into the data center, logged me into the domain controller so that I could do my work. And I was standing behind them writing down the admin password and all the account credentials. And then they walked out. They had absolutely no surveillance inside that server room at all. I changed the network card out with something else, and I walked out with their network card. So that's how easy some of these things are to kind of do. In the interest of time, I'm kind of cherry picking here, but I can speak to probably just about all these incidents, and kind of it will take all day. TJ Maxx is probably one that everyone is familiar with almost 46 million credit cards and stuff stolen. I'll flip down again. Bitcoin bust. Bitcoin, if everyone is familiar with, kind of some sort of a financial technology, Bitcoin is a kind of currency. There's literally nothing underneath it other than cryptography. Personally, I'd rather, set my money based on something that actually has legitimate currency behind it, or we're going to, we wind up selling tulips. Again. But Mt. Gox, at that time, I believe it was 2010 to 2014, they processed about 70% of all Bitcoin transactions. They had 850,000 Bitcoins that were looted, just completely, pulled from their marketplace. They recovered ultimately 200,000 of those Bitcoins, but that still resulted in bankruptcy and a $460 million loss. So I think, going down through, here's Sesame Street's YouTube page. That streamed pornography for about 22 minutes before Google and YouTube actually finally got that out of line. One of the reasons I used this particular infographic is it's from Duo Security. And Duo Security was very diligent about doing the research, as well as in the infographic, you can actually see links to where it's talked about in a more common sense type of language, not geek speak at all. So if you wanted to look up any of these, you're free to do so and kind of draw your own conclusions. It's always good to understand, why are these folks doing these things? And there are various different motivations and various different reasons. One, hacking for fun. That's if you've ever seen someone that was changing their oil on their car, for example, and they can't get the oil filter off. They take a big flat blade screwdriver and they wham that thing through both sides, and then they use that to kind of get the oil filter off. That's what we would call a life hack. I think there's even TV shows on that show you all of those things. Essentially, that is the core and the crux of where hacking came from. It's the intent to make systems do something that they weren't intended to do. That's what we would call the fun part of it. Part is you may pull a prank on a friend of yours, or something like that. But that's just the hacking for fun. Espionage, both corporate and governmental. One incident that comes to mind, and I could give a full hour on this particular incident because 300 companies in the Boston area were hit by this in 2012. One of my companies included. We spent approximately 2 weeks to get a total return to normal operations, and we were able to prove conclusively that no data was exfiltrated. And it stemmed from what we call a water hole attack. In this case, it was traced back, this whole incident was traced back to the Chinese government, who had wanted information on a deal being done by one particular financial advisor So they targeted his regional bank, which I had 6 people on my network that actually had a checking account at this bank. They targeted this gentleman's veterinarian. They targeted his kid's middle school. That's a perfect example of governmental espionage. Arkansas, this thing is just limited to China and Russia and things of that nature. Phishing, crypto malware comes to mind. Crypto malware, cyber terrorism is disruption of critical infrastructure. As interconnected as things were, and as interconnected as things are, in 2003, I was almost positive when the lights went out in New York City and all along the East Coast. I thought it was disruption of critical infrastructure. I thought the grid was hacked. If someone can, over-chlorinate the water supply, for example, that's not very good. Going down to hacktivism. Hacktivism, I think, is something that, especially given light of recent things that are going on, I think that is you're going to see that escalate, and that's essentially hacking for a cause. When we get down to prediction one, why I think this is going to be a high escalation, is what we call insider threat, and those are mainly disgruntled employees or folks that may even be plants into your company from corporate espionage that are actually going to either exfiltrate information that may harm your company, give a competitor a better advantage, or just do things flat out because they feel that they've been wronged and it's the company at fault. So we'll get into that down in the predictions here very quickly. So on to what I would call 5 best practices for supply chain management, as it relates to information security. Like I said, this is not all encompassing. There are many, many different standards out there, but just like information security, I think it's a lot of if you've got 5 different standards in place and one of them is saying don't run with scissors, for example, you're going to find it in 5 different places, and so you've got to find a way to kind of correlate all of that, map it together, and apply it. I think proper management of cloud access with everyone going to the cloud. And especially, very large companies that, may have, 50, 100,000 or more employees. Proper management of access, identity and access management is definitely a must. So you're going to need detailed continual review of access permissions, entitlements, roles. And if I'm preaching to the choir on this, great. I mean, kind of take a second and do this, pat yourself on the back a little bit because you deserve it. Hopefully I'm providing some food to thought for the folks that either haven't traveled down this road or are preparing to embark on it. So you need structured and repeatable processes for these reviews. You need people to own these things. And the business units have to be the people that take lead on this. They have to have an interest in this. Even if it's not their core competency here, we've got to have people that are in coordination with HR, certainly, especially in this day and age, where people are getting let go of and furloughed and everything in droves. So if you have someone that, okay, a worst case scenario, I'll play devil's advocate. You've got someone that they feel that they've been wronged, and they're being furloughed, and HR is not coordinated with the person that's supposed to kind of pull a plug on access. Then these folks are going to do very nasty things to you within whatever power and scope that you've given them. When you've got key performance indicators, obviously, that are in place, put some key risk indicators, have them mutual, and have some agreed metrics for measurement in place, within these agreements, and then hold each other to your security standards, right? Don't rubber stamp around them. Financial services used to be infamous for this. They would present something to security at the last minute, and they're like, "We are going to lose so much money if we don't get this done. Just say yeah, and we'll figure it out later." You can't do that. You've got to make sure that they're up to your security standards, and conversely, you've got to make sure that you're up to their standards. Because if they get hacked, then you're going to be that HVAC vendor, that allowed Target to get 40 million accounts spread around, right? Don't be that guy. On third-party management security. And your security is only as good as theirs. If you look to the right, you'll see OMG YATP. That's what your users are going to be saying, oh my God, yet another training program. Well, you know what? It's essential. But make sure that it's focused, make sure it's relatable, and target maybe 60 to 70% of your highest risk areas, because that's where you're going to get your biggest spread. I gave some examples here because any training that you do for executives and at the board level is not going to be probably not in my training programs. And we used to have not just some silly test that used to take once a year. We had a security fair once a year, and folks used to come in. They would browse the table, sign up to win an iPad. They'd bring their stuff from home. Hey, can you help me secure this? How do I work my wireless? Or I got this piece of technology for my kid at Christmas. What are some of the things you do? And it gets them engaged with all aspects of the user community. It used to get my staff more fully engaged and more fully evangelistic, as it were, and everybody knew who to contact in case something went wrong. So, just an idea. And as I said, don't ignore the people element. They're just as important as systems and data. But having said that, you've got to identify whatever roadblocks and single points of failure that you might have, and not only have a backup plan for those key individuals, but also some key areas of failure that could result from that. Make your program essential and mandatory. I came across this graphic from the BSI group that did a recent survey, and it just caused me to go, what? So it says organizations with a program to minimize supply chain risks. 63% have a plan and 37% don't. That is the epitome of just about most of the security surveys that I see as well. So your sector is not alone in it. But make sure that your program has the highest level of executive sponsorship as possible, and make sure that everyone is aware that you have a program. And you've got to integrate it highly into your business impact analysis and business continuity programs if you haven't done so already. And again, refer to the 4 previous slides as the kind of the best ways to kind of do this. Prediction number 1, as I had mentioned earlier before, there's going to be an increase in insider attacks. All predictions that you're going to find on information security are like from 2019, and then we have when the earth opened and swallowed everybody whole in 2020 here. So if you look at these numbers in a monthly unemployment rate, boom, it spiked to 14.7, 13.3. These are all disgruntled employees. There's going to be an increase. There's going to be a spike. When you take someone's livelihood away, you're going to see a drastic change in things. So that's prediction number 1. Prediction number 2, I'm predicting year of the O-Day, or the zero-day vulnerability. And you can read through this a little bit later. But the reason that I'm predicting that 0 days are going to be more and more delivered are one, we have the remote working factor. We don't have as many people, as it were, in the shop. And hands-on detection, and your detection can be the best in the world. If someone has time to develop a flaw in a piece of software, as they certainly do now, they're going to use them, and they're going to use them in one way, shape, or another, be it directly on you, or there are brokers that sell this. So keep that in mind. There's another financial way for them to make money off of this. Prediction 3, device hacking increase, be it medical devices. We do have an election year coming up. How many of those folks are wearing pacemakers, that are remotely accessible, or I can jam, or I can do something silly to them. Insulin pumps. I've had friends that have been hacking medical devices for at least 3 or 4 years. I've also had friends that have been hacking these autonomous vehicles for at least 3 or 4 years. ATMs are going to be another. If you walk up 5th Avenue through 7th Avenue in New York City, you're going to find bodega after bodega with unsecured ATMs. You can just walk right up, punch in an admin code, and then just change the trade denominations. And if you've got already stolen somebody's card or something, then you're getting double your money and you're walking out. Gasoline pumps are another area that I think these are all places that are ripe for hacking, and I think that folks having more time on their hands, that's what's going to happen. prediction for increase in peripheral hacking. Printers, video cards, etc. All of those things. When I used to do pen testing, when I broke into a network, I'd store all of my tools on a printer. Nobody ever looks there. That allowed me to go laterally back and forth throughout the organization undetected. Video cards are just like miniature computers stuck in a computer. If you can take over processing power and get someone hacking cryptocurrency, you're going to make an awful lot of money, especially if you can distribute that among thousands and thousands of connections. And last prediction, artificial intelligence-based attacks are going to increase substantially. It's not just it's not just your company trying to figure out ways to do AI and ML, deliver their attacks a little bit more intelligently and a little bit more effectively. Either content generation, predictability analysis, those sorts of things. So I think that this is going as ML gets smarter and people seemingly don't. I think we're going to run into a lot of that.
Well, you actually addressed two of the questions that we did have, and that was the supply chain elements of it. So that had come in early on, and you definitely took us through some of those best practices. And let's see. Oh, what's the best way, do you feel, to prevent fraudulent changes to supplier bank account information? And what controls work best?
I would say which I would have to ask what data protection controls are already in place. Are there systems in place to monitor it? The anti-fraud and anti-money laundering systems, maybe, for example. But going off of leverage what you've got in place. Don't try and throw the baby out with the bathwater with the latest technology or this, that, or the other thing. Leverage your processes that you've got in place and then tune the technology around that. Because that's a question that's kind of really very almost laser focused on particular companies as to how they do that with particular technology.
Yeah, and I'll add to that with my experience, just having been at corporates and been in supply management for decades myself. Some of the things that we did, we would run, these routines to look at what were actually employee bank accounts compared to our suppliers' bank accounts. Because we did have an incident where an employee was changing a supplier record in the vendor master, which we all know about, to their own, having fraudulent invoices processed, having it paid to their bank account, and then would switch it back. And so those are some of the routines that we would use to kind of vet and watch and audit for what bank accounts were being used and the changes in the dates and so forth to those. So just personal experience, having seen that scenario, that's one thing that I can offer. So Ken, I want to thank you for sharing your expertise in the field of cybersecurity. It's certainly an ever-changing field, and I think that we see cybersecurity consistently being added to our supply management risk programs. And so understanding how it's evolving, how it's growing and changing is a really important element for us to pay attention to. So thank you very much for sharing.
Thanks for having me here
with you today.